Hello, everybody. Jacob Jans here with Writing Launch. I'm really happy to see everyone here today, and thank you for coming. Today, I'll be presenting Ian Chandler, who is going to be giving a talk on how you can launch a freelance writing career for the long term. This is a talk he's given many times before, and it's something that has shown to be really helpful to writers around the world based on our experience. So if you're new to freelance writing and you don't know how to build a successful career, you don't know how to get published, this is for you. So I hope you'll pay attention to what Ian has to say. You never know which specific thing will help you in a presentation like this. Something I learned from my dad actually is you always look for the one thing that can make the big difference. And I remember during one of our first webinars that we've given, a student used one detail from Ian's presentation to get published in the LA Times. And it was just that one specific piece of information. And that was about how to follow up in the right way with a publisher, with an editor when they ignore you, which happens all the time. They sent a follow-up. I think it was about 2 weeks after the initial pitch. And just because of that one follow-up, their pitch was accepted and they got their first publication in the LA Times. That's pretty cool. And if they had not been looking for that one piece of information, maybe they wouldn't have gotten that. So I really encourage you you don't know what's going to get you to the next step. So pay attention to that. And thank you, Dad, for helping me learn that idea as well. Again, thank you for being here. And Ian, welcome.
Thank you, Jacob. Hey, everybody. And yeah, as Jacob said, welcome to today's webinar. That was a great introduction with a great point because, in giving these talks for so many years now, I've seen people, react in different ways, take different things away, and also learn a bunch of new stuff that they didn't even think they were, signing up for, basically. So they got a lot of bonus knowledge, which is what I'm going to try to do today. And, as Jacob said, this is a presentation that's just proven to be so effective. And I wanted to share it with you all today. I will be taking questions at the end. Both Jacob and I are going to field some questions in a Q&A segment at the end. So if you do have questions during the webinar, feel free to comment them. And if I answer your question, great. If your question doesn't get answered, then you can put it in the comments or the chat or wherever you're watching, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of roughly our hour together or so. And yeah, I'm going to be trying to weave some bits of knowledge in with the webinar as well. And what's kind of unusual about this webinar is that it not only takes you through the start of a freelance career, but also prepares you for the next level, which is what I think really helps to set it apart from a lot of other kind of training videos or webinars or presentations that you might see on this topic. So, let's get right into it because I think there's no better time than the present. So yeah, as Jacob said, this is about launching a freelance writing career from home. And that's one of the great things about freelance writing, for me at least, is that you can do it from anywhere and you don't need, basically anything. If you have a computer, which, you have access to because you're watching this right now, then you pretty much have everything you need. Let me hit this. Okay, cool. So yeah, this is a really flexible career, but there's a lot involved with it. So I'm going to be taking you step by step through what you need to start and then also get to the next level. First, I want to take you through the fundamentals of what freelance writing is, because I think that it gets portrayed inaccurately so often. And people kind of see the term freelance writing, and I think because of how little known it really is, it's not one of the more popular professions, I guess, although it is gaining a lot of popularity. There's still a lot of myth surrounding it. And so I wanted to break it down and just kind of lay it out there and let you know what freelance writing is all about. And at its heart, it is a business. And that's how you have to approach it. And obviously we're writers because we love to write, and we like to serve others with that writing. But at its core, freelance writing is still a business. You're sort of in the business of helping other people, but you have to think of it in that way. Um, and I'll be going into detail on what that means, some other implications later on. But as I alluded to, this is a really excellent and flexible way to make a living. It's pretty much the only job I've ever had. I started doing it in college and then have been doing it ever since. And it affords so many possibilities to you. And if you have sort of the patience for it and you have the grit and tenacity for it, then you'll be all set, I think. And again, it's flexible. You can make as little or as much as you need to, and you can work as much or as little as you need to. So it really is customizable. You can do it full time, you can do it part time. It really works around you, which is really nice because not only are you your own boss, but also you're just kind of doing things as you need to do them, which is really, really nice. And of course, you can work from anywhere in the world. And this is a question we get a lot. We get a lot of questions from writers who are not based in the United States who ask, is this just a US thing? And by no means is it. And I think that's one of the bigger myths about freelancing, is that you can only do it if you're in the United States, which is a total myth. We've come across writers in pretty much every country who are successful. So that's not a barrier at all. And real quick, I want to go over some types of freelance writing just to give you some examples. And this is a short list, but it includes article writing, copywriting, content writing, technical writing, and social media writing. Those are just a few types of freelance writing. And you'll notice that creative writing is not in here. And I always make that distinction because a lot of people see freelance writing and think it just means getting paid to write literally anything. And that is sort of not really what it entails. I think that's a bit misleading of a categorization. So things like, poetry, fiction, creative nonfiction do not fall under freelance writing. That's a whole separate thing entirely. But freelance writing does have a lot of types of writing within it. It's a way to make a living with your writing, and then it encapsulates a bunch of things. Generally, you're writing things to help people, either sell products or share something or inform or persuade. There are all kinds of examples there, but I just wanted to give you a few to give you an idea for what we're dealing with and what we're going to be talking about. And if you're interested in specific forms of these, you can dive deep in. In fact, we have many courses that go into specific topics like this. So if you're interested, definitely hang around and listen for the details about the membership, which will be coming at the end of the webinar. And if you actually, I should have mentioned this earlier, but if you're interested in more free training, definitely hang around till the end of the webinar. Now, let's go back to the business thing for a second. In order to understand freelance writing, the writing part is not really what you have to understand, because, if you have a passion for writing, if you've trained yourself, if you have the skill for it, then you're pretty much set in that department. Now, of course, you do want to brush up on things like grammar and whatnot and style, and make sure that your demographic, and the kind of job that you're doing, and you kind of know the styles associated with it. You know how to write that. But at the very core of freelancing, since it's a business, you need to know what your clients want, because essentially what you're doing is trading, a service, or if you like, you can think of it as a product, the product of your writing. You're trading a service or a product for money. And so, you're employing clients along the way, you're working with people along the way. And in order to get the best a result out of your freelancing, you need to understand your clients. And this is pretty basic business, but the thing that really strikes me about this is that not many freelancers think about this, especially ones who are getting started out, because they just kind of think about what they're doing. They're focused on the writing. And what you see is a lot of beginner freelance writers end up writing content that is more so something they would want to read rather than what the client needs for, their specific project. So that's a big barrier in freelance writing. And this is basically the way around that, just understanding what your clients want. And this is going to be a big common thread in the webinar today, is just that idea of understanding how to provide value and then providing it. Now let's go over briefly what you need to start a freelance career, because as I said earlier, it's really not much. The first thing I think is a passion for helping people, as cliche as that sounds, because at its heart, that's what freelance writing is. And I might go into that a little more later on in the webinar talking about business, but for now, I'll just kind of leave it at that. But really, to me, this is the crux of freelance writing and business as a whole. You also need the willingness to learn, which is very important, because even after 3, 4, 10 years as a freelance writer, you're still going to be learning new things. You're going to be needing to learn new things because the market shifts pretty rapidly, and so you need to have that adaptability. Self-motivation is also a big one, and of course, this is another kind of cliche bullet point in every resume ever. But people like to say they're self-starters, but this is really key because it's a solitary career. You don't have usually anyone else to help you, especially when you're starting out. You're not outsourcing work or anything like that. You're doing literally everything yourself, and you're both the employer and the employee. So that creates a whole slew of complications that you need to be able to face, and a big part of that is having that self-motivation to carry you through it. And you also need both short-term and long-term plans, and this is so important because you might have some short-term plans. I would bet that most of you don't have long-term plans. And the reason I say that is because most freelancers don't. And it's one of the biggest problems that freelancers run into, is that they don't have long-term plans. And what that does is it makes them so short-sighted, and that can really harm a writing career, especially when you're getting started out. It can just, annihilate it. It's kind of like shooting yourself in the foot. So, thinking about the short term is great, but also thinking about the long term is so important. Where are you going to be in 6 months, a year, 5 years, all that stuff? What are your goals? Thinking about that again in a kind of business mindset is going to really, really help you here. Now, since we've gone over kind of the basics of what you need and just what freelance writing is, let's talk about actually getting started and finding your first few jobs. And that's basically the question that you reach at this point is, how do I just get jobs from nowhere? So let's say you are somebody who likes to write and you've identified freelance writing as something you want to do. And you find yourself wondering, how do I even get jobs? Where do I look? What's the process like? How do I, get those first jobs to set me up for, bigger ones? Because what people really struggle with is the idea of starting from nothing, because it's kind of that classic employment catch-22, is that you need experience to get work, but you need work to get experience. And so it seems like a paradox, but it is not, because there are ways around that most people just don't think of, and most people approach it the wrong way, which I'll talk about. But basically, it's about looking in the right places. And this is why most freelancers struggle when they're starting out. It's because they're looking in the wrong places. And if you look, in the common places, like if you're, let's just say you're a beginner freelancer, right? You're brand new to it. You don't have any experience. Where are you going to look for jobs? Just, searching how to become a freelance writer. Well, you might end up on a freelancing platform like Fiverr, or, a Content Mill, Upwork, another freelancing platform. You might just be looking at places like Indeed and Monster and Craigslist for writing jobs. And you might even just, kind of be posting your services anywhere you can to try to get work. And these are all very common ways of doing it. And they're all also the wrong ways of doing it, because all of those paths I just mentioned are so time consuming, and they don't return on your investment of time and effort that you put into them. They don't give you any financial return back, or barely any if they do. And so the reason that most beginner freelancers struggle is because they're not looking in the right places. And we'll talk about where the right places are and how to find them. And you want to start with just basically avoiding websites that post low-paying jobs. And this is another common hurdle. It's really interesting to me how the average beginner freelance writer really they might want to make a full-time living out of this, but they also really undervalue themselves right out of the gate. Like before they even get started, they just undervalue themselves. And it's sort of this myth that if you're starting now, you have to charge almost nothing or work for free just to, get a leg up. And while that's sort of the traditional model, it's not the case, at least in freelance writing. And I think that's actually untrue for a lot of other job and career paths as well. But it's really not true here because, like I mentioned earlier, there are workarounds. And paradoxically, when you start out, you have to think of yourself as having a high amount of value, because if you undervalue yourself from the start, then you're never going to go anywhere. And part of that avoidance to undervaluing yourself comes in the form of avoiding websites that post these low paying jobs. So, if you're seeing jobs that pay like a penny per word or, $5 per article or whatever, you want to skip those places and avoid them entirely, because you're essentially wasting your time. And of course, time is money. So you're wasting money and not getting any back. The trick is to look for opportunities that have a low barrier to entry. And this is, I think, one of the great things that the internet has done, because I think, we can all agree the internet is full of good things and bad things. But one of the things it's done, at least for writers, is really even the playing field and given people platforms that they would never have before. And again, that's good and bad in many ways. But what that means practically for a new writer is that, they can pretty much get published with no experience. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. And just start a writing career from literally nothing, because just the fact that they have platforms to share it is enough. You don't need experience for some of these platforms. Some of them you do. You're not going to start out writing for the New York Times or what have you, but you can start, getting paid for your writing right away if you look in the right places and just have the right strategies. So that's going to be the key. Now, finding these is kind of a different story. In one of our courses, our No BS course on freelance writing, we go over how to build a job seeking system. So basically that means you are finding where the good jobs tend to be for you, whether that's on a job board or a social media page or whatever, and you're tracking that and you're forming a strategy around that, revisiting these places, keeping your eye on them, and just finding a strategy to regularly identify and apply for jobs that fit your niche and just your overall needs and desires as a freelance writer. And that's sort of the condensed version of that, but we do go over that entirely in our No BS course. Talking about that would kind of exceed the scope of this webinar, so that's why I'm just kind of referencing it. But that's essentially what you're going to be doing here is, you are just kind of looking for jobs, but in a very streamlined way to where you're not wasting any excess time. And it can take a while. It really can. I am trying to, not sugarcoat things. That's one thing that I've always tried to do, is keep things very transparent. And, it can take a while to find jobs. If you are just starting out, and if you don't have the right strategy, it can take you weeks, if not months, to find like your first job. What we try to do in the course is cut that amount of time by presenting you with, a system for doing that. But even if you just have a more structured approach than just looking for any old job, if you have a more structured approach than that, you'll probably cut the time that it would take otherwise in half or maybe even more. And one big thing I want to address is don't worry about not having a portfolio, because as we talked about, these jobs that have a low barrier to entry do not require a portfolio because, like I said, the playing field is a lot more even now, and there are more opportunities for writing than there ever have been in human history. And so what that means for you is that there are many opportunities that just want many publications or clients that just want people who can write, and they don't care about qualifications, because everything is sort of very democratized and open source now and all that. A lot of people just want writers who can write well, and the kind of prestige of having some, certificate or a degree or whatever has pretty much faded. For example, one of the funny things about my career is that I actually do have a degree in English, but I started writing while I was in college. So I have never used my degree to help me get a job, even though my degree is in the same field as what I do. So it just goes to show that, even having a really relevant degree, in writing or English or what have you, isn't necessary, and a lot of people who are successful freelancers are self-taught. So that's a very important point to make. And all of this is just to say, if you don't have a portfolio, and you have no published work, don't sweat it. Everyone has to start from somewhere. And if you can start in the right way, then you'll be starting out in a much better place than the majority of freelance writers. And this is where we see freelancers getting a leg up initially, because when you start out, it's not even just the fact that you're looking for jobs or whatever, like everybody else. It's the fact that if you can build a system for yourself and learn early on what works and what doesn't, and take a more targeted approach, then you will be ahead of so many people who are basically your competitors, and you'll have an edge over them. So this is where that really comes into play. So keep that in mind as we go through the webinar. And as I mentioned, the majority of clients and editors that you're going to be dealing with, they don't really care about experience anymore. That's just kind of archaic now, almost. I mean, it depends on the job, certainly, but for the context that I'm talking about having these opportunities that have a low barrier to entry, where basically they just want someone who can write well. In that context, you don't need a portfolio at all. Of course, you should have a portfolio and build one, and we have videos and content on that, both on our channel here on YouTube and in our courses as well. Tons of content about that, including a portfolio masterclass that we have for members only. But until you have one, don't worry about it. Just go look for the right jobs, look in the right places, and I think you'll find that you're a lot more successful with that than you might think. And when you're this early on, what you want to be doing is focusing on your strengths and drawing attention to your value. And this calls back to what I mentioned earlier. What kind of value are you going to provide, and how are you going to provide it? And how are you going to convince people that you can provide that value? The funny thing about this point is that I've ran into so many writers over the years. I've run into so many writers who are starting out, and they say, should I just say that I'm starting out? And they kind of see that as something they need to be transparent about, and really just blunt about, saying, I have no work. I am a total beginner. I don't have a portfolio. And to me, that's silly to bring into the conversation, because it's just unwarranted. At the end of the day, every job that you will ever get as a writer is essentially you saying, hey, I know how to write. I can do this for your business or your magazine or whatever. And the person on the other end going, okay, I like that. Let's do it. And that's the core of every job that you will ever get. And when you're starting out, you can do that same thing. It just doesn't come with some of the additional complications or bells and whistles that you might have down the line in order to help you get that job. And I think that's a good way of thinking about it, is just, experience and accolades are all things that can just help you get jobs more often, more consistently. But by no means are they so important that you just can't break into freelance writing unless you know the right people or whatever. It's completely a myth in that regard. The way that I always recommend getting started, and the way that I did get started, is writing for publications. And basically this is when you approach any sort of online publication, and I use that as a kind of catch-all term for pretty much any site that posts articles or writing or whatever. Generally, article writing is what we're talking about here. So things like the Atlantic, sort of, those types of sites where they're either mostly informational sites in a certain niche, whether that's gardening or finance or whatever, just websites that post articles in those niches. So that's what I mean by publications. This is a great way to get started, because it's sort of everything that's good about freelance writing. There's only one major drawback, which is sustainability. So this is really not something that most people can do for forever. Most freelancers have different types of work, but I mean, when you're starting out, getting the right jobs with publications is so rewarding and so freeing. And I think it's something that, especially at the start of your career, you are really equipped to do. The process here is simple, is that you just want to look for publications in your niche that ask for pitches. And you do want to find publications that ask for pitches and not entire articles, because many publications will ask for entire article submissions up front. And of course, the problem with this, that again, a lot of freelancers don't see, is that if you write the entire article and then they say, oh, no, sorry, we don't want it, then you essentially have an article that you can't do anything with because you wrote it just for that publication. And I think one thing that freelancers who are starting out don't understand is that, content today has to be so customizable to one person or one business or one publication that if for some reason that backfires and you can't use it, it's literally unusable for anywhere else. You could rewrite it, but at that point, you're taking a time loss that's like twice as much as the original, because you're not only writing a piece that went nowhere, but now you have to rewrite that piece and repersonalize it for a different context. So it's much better to just find publications that ask for pitches only. And pitching itself it seems scary, but it's really just that first pitch that's the most terrifying. And then after that, it becomes a lot easier. And it's easy to learn. And of course, the more you pitch, the better you get. We have an entire course on this. We have so much material on it. We have videos on it, workshops, everything. But it's all designed to show you that it's really easy to learn and to show you the ins and the outs of it. But overall, to kind of summarize this section, freelancing this way, writing for publications, is a great way that can help you get off the ground. And the reason, just the underlying reason, is because most publications today, at least of a certain level, once you get into the really big ones, you are talking, okay, I'm going to need some experience now. But for a lot of publications these days, they just want content, and that's sort of one of the great things about writing, is that there's always a demand for content. Publications are always going to need writing. As long as there are publications, they're always going to need writing, and that means they'll always need writers. And because of the internet, they've outsourced this work, and they might have an in-house team, but they might just outsource a lot of it and take submissions and kind of offer a tapestry of different content from different writers. And for a lot of publications, that's like a really good thing, because it really diversifies their content. But then where you come into play is you're someone who has, the ability to write, you have that skill, and you can provide something helpful. You can provide helpful, valuable content for other people. And so that's, really, like I said, the heart of all of this is being able to help other people with your writing. And writing for publications is a great way to do that, because then you're not only helping the publication, but also helping the readers of that publication. So it's really a rewarding process, and it's really, really easy. And like I said, we have entire courses on these topics. It's really easy to get started. So if you're interested in more on this, definitely stick around to the end, and I'll tell you about how to get a free month of training. And speaking of the membership, I wanted to quickly go over a few of the perks that you'll be getting if you do decide to join. And I'm going to talk about two here because they're really related to what I just mentioned about looking for publications. The first perk is the paid publishers database, which is one of our best resources, if not the best resource, because when we talk about pitching to publications, the two common questions that we get are, how do you pitch and how do you find publications, right? And this is our solution to how do you find publications, because what we've done is accumulated, I think we're nearing 2,000 publications, and we just have them organized by niche, all these categories. You can find information about what each publication does, what they're about, how much they pay, what kind of article length we're talking. All of the information is right there at your fingertips. And I always say this is the resource that I wish I had had when I was getting started, because I had to just manually search everything, using Google. And it was a nightmare because it took so long. And a lot of these publications I would never have found. So this is a really, really good resource if you want a sort of one-stop shop for looking for publications that pay very well. And none of these are asking for free writing. These are all publications that pay writers very well. So you don't have to worry about that. The next perk is our bulletproof pitching system. And the reason I bring this up is because we were just talking about pitching, and this is our entire course on it. This is a 4-week course that so many people have gone through and found it so useful because it gets you pitching in real life. So this course is not just sort of a theoretical academic course. It has assignments where your job is to send actual pitches out to real publications. And it really gets you off the ground and gives you an incentive and a framework to start pitching and get active in that way. So this is a great, great course if you're interested in that. We also have a course called Break into Freelance Web Writing, which talks about the overall concept, but this is just a course on the craft of pitching itself. So if you're interested in that, definitely check this out when you sign up. Now, one thing that I wanted to mention at this point, because we're talking about getting your first few jobs and avoiding the wrong places, is I wanted to talk about content mills and freelancing platforms. And I believe I saw some comments about this on the welcome page for the webinar, where a lot of people were saying, "Oh, I'm on a content mill or whatever," or I think I saw someone saying, "Oh, I want to be able to get off them." Now, if you're not familiar with these, ignorance is bliss, just know to avoid these places. But if you are familiar with these, and if you have used these in the past, and maybe you're currently dependent on them, I would encourage you to avoid these because, as I mentioned earlier, when you look in the wrong places, you rob yourself of time and money and energy. And trajectory is another thing, because with these mills and platforms, there is a limit to how far you can go, and generally that limit isn't even high. It's very low, and these platforms are designed to undervalue writers and go quantity over quality. So I really recommend avoiding all these places. So you have sites like Upwork, Fiverr, Textbroker, Writers Work, Constant Content, Scripted, Xeris, iWriter, Writer Access, all these places. These are all places that you want to avoid. So just know that, because I understand that it can be hard to go off these sites if you're dependent on them, but the best way is just to not rely on them in the first place. And, writing for publications is such a better way of starting out. It's so much easier, and it affords you so many more possibilities for just growing as a writer. So please keep that in mind. I know it's tough. I know this seems like guaranteed work, and it seems like it's paying work, and that's the hard thing about these sites, is that they do pay. They do offer beginners, a kind of window of opportunity. But the problem is that there are so many caveats that it just becomes not worth it. And you eventually end up essentially paying to write, even though it doesn't seem like them. So this is a big, big part of starting out, is to avoid these places, because looking in the right places also means avoiding the wrong ones. Now, all of that has been kind of the how to get started phase of this, but I also wanted to touch on how do you get to the next level, because this is a question I think every writer should be thinking about when they start out. And again, this goes back to thinking about long-term goals. You're not just thinking about short-term goals, you're thinking about long-term goals as well. So, what does it mean to turn freelancing into a career? There are a few things here. And the first is that you have to really define your goals. And if any of you know the SMART goal setting system, it's like an acronym SMART. That's a great way of doing it. But no matter how you do it, the important thing is that you do it, because if you just have vague goals, it's going to be so hard to achieve those goals because of their vagueness. So you want to be specific, and you want to create goals that you can easily track and measure. You want to create goals that are so specific, and they're trackable, and you can say, okay, I've done that. Because some freelancers just say, oh, I want to write for a living, or I want to be a professional writer. Well, what does that mean for you? What does a living mean for you? What does that entail? Is that just a certain amount of dollars per month? Is that, do you need benefits on the side? How much financial, freedom do you need? What kind of jobs you're looking for? What kind of niche are you looking at? All these questions fall under that category. And so if you just have a vague goal like, oh, I want to be a professional writer, you're never going to be able to say, well, I've achieved that. There's not a hard limit to where you can say, okay, I've done this. And you need those kind of delineated finish lines to just say, okay, I've done that. I can move on to the next goal. And sometimes this means making short, achievable goals, really small ones. Other times it means just making big goals that you can track and maybe break down into smaller goals to help you along the way. But overall, the important thing here is just to be able to track your goals. That's so, so important. And you need to ask yourself really detailed questions along the way. Questions like, how much money do you need to make? How much time per week, per day can you dedicate to writing? What are your needs like? What are you looking at writing to do? Do you want to do this full-time or part-time? There are just so many questions that you need to ask yourself. And these detailed questions will help you create detailed goals, because the more specific your answers are, the more specific your goals will be able to be. And again, you want to think about the long term here. What I see so often is freelance writers who are starting out are essentially living paycheck to paycheck because they're so short-sighted. All they can think about is getting that next job, because when you're starting out, it seems like freelance writing is nothing more than just kind of a string of getting jobs, and you just need to get the next job because you have no stability. If you don't have any regular work that's coming in and giving you those jobs, you need to be going out and finding it, right? And so what that means is that you get so hyper focused on just finding each job that you fail to think about the long term. You feel to prepare yourself, and so you eventually reach a point where something just breaks. It's not sustainable. You can't do that forever. You need a system and a framework in place to hold everything together. And thinking about the long term is one way to help solidify that framework. If you're short-sighted about your writing career, you can essentially, like I said at the beginning, you can essentially shoot yourself in the foot, and it can dramatically harm a budding writing career. Because, if you're just focused on each individual job and you're so just focused on, like I said, essentially living paycheck to paycheck, then you ignore all of the career opportunities. And nothing is contextualized in the context of a larger career, because if you want to do this, whether it's full-time or part-time, even if you just want to do this regularly, you need that kind of framework. You need to think about the long term. It's so important. And that's why I'm stressing it so much. Now, when I talked about detailed questions, I wanted to provide a few to get you thinking, kind of give you some prompts to think about, and hopefully these questions can help you create some goals. So here are some questions that you want to ask yourself along the way. And this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, this idea of providing value, of being able to help your clients. How can I consistently deliver value and results? And what does that mean for me and my clients? It's kind of a loaded question, and I think it's going to be hard to answer. It might take a lot of time and thought, and your answer might be really long, and there might be other questions kind of that reveal themselves. But this kind of pair of questions is really, really foundational. It's something that I think you should ask yourself before you even apply for your first job, before you send out your first pitch. How can I become someone's number one problem solver? This is something we addressed in one of our courses, but the idea of becoming someone's number one problem solver is, this idea of finding somebody who you can benefit and who you really like working with, whose work you believe in and can get behind. And getting to the point where, if it's financially lucrative for you, you can say, okay, how can I become the first person that this person thinks about when they think of the word writing or writer? It's that sort of thing. You want to be someone's go-to for all of their content needs. This is kind of a big one too. Another pair of questions that are related. How can I find sustainable long-term writing jobs that will provide a steady income? What types of jobs like that exist in my niche, and how can I get them? Again, no real tips for this. Is just stuff you have to figure out on your own. And speaking of long-term goals, where do I want to be in 1 year, in 5 years? You could even do 6 months or even 3 months if that's sort of the long-term for you right now. Because when you are starting out, the long-term is kind of shorter than than if you were kind of 5 years down the line. Because when you're starting out, you do need to think about the short term. Sure, you need to think about where that next job is going to come from and how you're going to find it. But you also do need to think about the bigger picture. So, maybe don't create a detailed scenario of where you're going to be in 5 years, but have some idea. Have a framework, a path for yourself, because that is going to make all the difference. If you can have some sort of pathway or a system for yourself, like we teach in the courses, then you're going to be all set. I think at this juncture, I wanted to talk about a third membership perk. And this is, of course, these are 3 of many of them that we offer. But I wanted to talk about our members only Zoom meetings, because our Zoom meetings are a place where we answer these kinds of questions regularly. We hold these about once a month or so. And we get people from all around the world and people with all different types of goals. And you can not only network with each other, but also ask Jacob and I questions. And, it's resulted in a lot of good creative sessions where people leave with a better idea of where they need to go, what they want to do, or what their plans are going to be, next steps, all that stuff. And we've had a lot of fun with it. It's been a joy to, see people in the community face to face and be able to help them and talk with them and learn about, what their goals are and just share tips and knowledge and all that. So if you're interested in all that stuff, definitely check these out. I think our next one should be coming up here pretty soon. And whenever you join as a member, you'll get all the details for this in your inbox. So you won't need to, schedule it or anything. We'll let you know all the details. Now let's talk about the key to long-term success, because I think this is going to tie a lot of what we talked about today together. If there's any one key to success, which I think is, it's kind of flawed to say that there's just one key, but I think if there is any key, it's consistency. And when you look at the most successful people who have ever lived, they were all incredibly consistent. Not all of them were equally skilled. Not all of them had the same opportunities. The playing field was not level, but they were consistent. And that's why and many times, many occasions, that's why people succeeded. It's just because they were consistent. And so I really do believe that the only difference between success and failure is consistency. And this is something that has been backed up for me over the, I think over 5 years that we've been doing Writing Launch, is seeing people in kind of 2 camps, people who start out and just try a little bit and, their attempts are spotty and varied, and they switch strategies and stuff, and then nothing seems to be working. And so they just give up and they're not consistent. And so they kind of fail. The people who we've seen succeed are people who have a sort of tenacity that just makes them want to keep going and keep going and keep going, even if they get knocked down, and just be consistent about it. Learn from your successes and your failures and keep going. That's sort of the key to a successful writing career, and I think a career in really any sort of business. If you can be consistent, sooner or later, you will find yourself succeeding. It might take you longer than other people. And I think I read a quote that was like, a comparison is the thief of joy, which I think is a really apt quote here, because it's really not about comparing yourself to other people. It's about finding what works for you. It's about finding ways to accommodate your needs, and to turn freelance writing into a career for you. And what that means is just being consistent. And so sooner or later, even if it takes you a long time, even if it happens overnight, either way, you're going to find yourself succeeding at some point. And of course, this will take time. Even though I just said overnight, that never happens. It's going to take a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of effort, but it's really, really rewarding. And I think the benefits to all of that far outweigh the initial, especially the initial investment of time and energy that you have to put in. But one thing I wanted to make sure I said was about kind of strategies, because if you're starting out and you're trying to get jobs and you're like, nothing's working, I must just not be good. What you need to do in that instance is take a minute and realize that you need to give this some time. Sometimes with freelance writing, it can take a long time. It can take a few weeks, a few months for any strategy to pan out. So it's really important that you give any certain strategy or approach the time that it needs because if it's not working after a long time, then yeah, you need to switch strategies. But don't change approaches the minute that something doesn't work. I see so many writers doing that, and it's one of the most fundamental mistakes that they can make. Instead, give it some time, and then if you're not getting any results after that, then you can pivot, and then you can change strategies and try something new. All right, I want to kind of end the webinar section by kind of asking, what is your role as a content writer? And this goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning about the idea of freelance writing being a business and about business being about helping people. So I think if I had to summarize the goal of a freelance writer in one phrase, it would be to provide helpful, valuable content. This is the backbone of freelance writing. And this is one kind of myth I wanted to dispel, because I think this is something that we get taught a lot, or we feel a lot with writing, is that it's really about kind of sharing our personal stories. And with freelance writing, that's not the case. It's, in my opinion, it's even better because it's about helping others. I have gotten to work with so many businesses over the years, and individuals too, entrepreneurs or solopreneurs, as you might call them, who have done really cool things, and they've been able to start businesses, make livelihoods for themselves, help other people with their jobs. And so I get to be a part of that chain, of people helping others. And that's just a great feeling to have. It's really rewarding. And I think that's one of the best things about freelance writing, is that you have a direct connection to the people that you're helping. You're not just some person in an office somewhere, pushing paper. You're really having an impact on these people. And again, with all of this, we're going back to that idea of providing value. How are you going to do that? How can you provide a value to the clients and editors that you work with? That's something you need to think about. And if I had to answer this question succinctly, I would say help them by creating content that will help them achieve their goals. Again, it's a really simple idea, but in practice, it requires a lot. So this is something you need to think about. And then that creates the question, how can you write the best possible content to help the most people? And if I had to answer that in a short way, I would say you curate and present valuable information that is going to improve the lives of the people who read it. It's that simple. And basically that's a lot of what we teach in the courses. We go into depth on all of these topics, but this is sort of a snapshot, a bird's eye view of what freelance writing is all about. And speaking of our courses, I briefly want to tell you about what is included in our free offer, because if you looked at our email, you would have seen that we're offering a free month of training. So if you're interested in that, here are the details for that. First of all, I want to go over what's included in the membership to let you know what we have to offer. The first, and I think this is why most of you will be interested in it, is immediate access to all of our courses, including our acclaimed NoBS course on freelance writing. And this is sort of something that I feel is pretty unique to us, because we give immediate unlimited access to all of our courses. You're not limited to any specific courses. You can literally take advantage of everything we have to offer, and the value on that is around $977. We also offer personal feedback and coaching in the form of email coaching, as well as the member meetings, which we'll talk about in a minute. But just the personal feedback through email alone and that coaching is about $100 per hour value. We have that paid publishers database we talked about earlier, which is about a $50 value. And in my mind, that's a low value on that because it's so valuable. Those live Zoom sessions are about $100 each if we were to sell those separately. We also have an exclusive video library that has tons of content. I think we have around 50 videos or something like that, which is a value of about 500, if not more. So the total cost, if we were to parcel these out separately and sell them, would be around, $1,700, if not more, which it probably would be. But the actual cost is just $47 a month. And this is because we want to make everything accessible for as many people as possible. So even though we're offering a free month, we just wanted to let you know that this is how affordable everything is. And, I think you'd be hard pressed to find another course or another membership that had that much value. And that's really what we're trying to do, is just make it as accessible as possible. But to get you started, we want to give you your first month free. So if you sign up now, you will be able to use our coupon code, which I think is donate. I could be wrong on that, but you'll get all the information you need in the email, and you can get a free month of membership. And all you need to do is go to writinglaunch.com, sign up, and you can get immediate access to all of that stuff. All of the courses, you can start whichever one you want. You can start more than one. You look at our videos, our workshops. You can participate in our Zoom meetings, and your first month is going to be entirely free. And you're going to get an email about that. So definitely check that out if you're interested. And of course, we do hope that you stay past the free month. Our community is absolutely wonderful. We have writers from all around the world who are helping each other and, networking and creating friendships. And it's really, really spectacular to see. And it's humbling to be able to make an impact on so many people. So if you're interested in all that, please do sign up, get your first month free with that coupon code that you'll get in the email. And now I think let's move into a short Q&A. I want to answer, a few questions before our time is up. So if you have a question from earlier that we didn't answer, let me know and we'll get through as many as we can. And also if we don't make it to your question, then you can email us at support@writinglaunch.com and we will answer some questions there as well. And we're always open for questions from anybody. So if you have questions about the membership or about freelance writing in general, you can always hit us up. But let's answer some live ones.
Ian, thank you for that. We have a lot of really good questions, so I'm just going to jump into them. Joseph
Awesome.
asked, how do I negotiate with clients if I think their pay is too low?
We have an entire lesson on this, and we have a lot of other content on this because it's such an in-depth topic. It's kind of tricky to answer because the answer is sort of just to get comfortable with negotiation, which kind of sounds like a circular answer, but you have to find out a way that works for you, because some people, especially if you're kind of more business minded or you're more naturally extroverted, you might be a little more aggressive in your negotiation. If you're someone like me who's really introverted and just doesn't want to create bad relationships with people, you might be a little more gentle in your negotiation. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. You just have to kind of know the basic tenets of negotiation. So like even just studying, reading books on negotiation can help. Looking at people who do it professionally, studying it in a business context, like what we provide in the courses, that can all help. I think one tip that I will give is that when you are negotiating, just think about how far apart you are, because there is going to come a point where it's not worth negotiating with somebody and you just need to say, sorry, I'm not the right person. And, saying no to work or trying to, saying no to work is tough because you typically want to try to make it work. But if the price that you have set for yourself is here and the client is all the way here, if you're not here, if you're like here, then you just need to say, look, sorry, I'm the wrong person. I'm sure you can find someone on Fiverr or something, because at that point you're just wasting your time on the negotiation. So keep that in mind when you're negotiating, and try to strike a nice balance of reaching a middle ground while also continuing to value yourself, because I think one of the worst times you can undervalue yourself is during negotiation. So make sure to keep that in mind. But also, if you sign up for the course, I think that lesson is in the Freelance Career Workshop course. So check that out if you're interested in that. But it's a tough question to answer succinctly.
Ian, I think I have one more thing to add. And one thing in terms of negotiating that is really helpful is, and this connects to another question, is like, what is considered to be a low payment? That is a really subjective thing. As someone who needs to make a living, you have to know how much money you need to get from a job in order to make a living, right? Mm-hmm. If someone's going to pay you $10 to write an article and you have to feed your whole family, it's not going to work. So like, as the very basic criteria for your own negotiating and your own consideration of payment, you have to have an idea in your head of, okay, this article will take me an hour to write, and for that I'll be paid $50, $75, $100, $200, however those numbers add up. You need to know how they'll add up into being something that is viable. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes back to what you were saying at the very beginning, how new writers often undervalue themselves and
Mhm.
don't charge enough. You should always, even as a beginning writer, have that in mind of what you need to earn in order to actually make this viable for the long term. And if it's your very first job, it's okay if maybe it's not there, but be aware of where it needs to be.
Yeah.
You should know how much money you need to be making per article. And you can get better at that over time, but at least be aware of that, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's like one quick analogy I'll give is, let's say you were opening like a bookstore or a shoe store or something like that. You wouldn't offer everything for free for the first 3 months, because that's not what it's about. You might have like a small discount for the first like 10 customers or whatever, or have like a doorbuster, but you wouldn't, the things that freelancers do when they're starting out, you would never do if you had like a brick and mortar business. And I think that is very telling of the way that we sort of think, because, we're just on the internet behind a computer screen. It becomes easy to not really see the tangible value in what we do. So you have to keep that in mind when you're setting your prices and negotiating.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So we have another question from Natalie, and I think this speaks to a question a lot of people have, at least based on our experience teaching writers. Is Natalie writes, I've struggled with picking a niche, and it's definitely halted my progress to pursue freelance writing. Is there a way to get started without picking a niche right away?
Yeah, it's, what's funny is that I used to answer this question kind of differently, but maybe a few years ago. And after so many years of seeing writers ask this and seeing what their problems are, I think one of the things that writers do here is they overthink about niche selection, because you want to have an idea of what you want to write about, but like when you're starting out, part of the process is to experiment and find out what works for you. When I first started out writing, I was doing some articles on like productivity and kind of self-improvement, and I've never since done that. I did a few to kind of get a feel for it, and I've never done anything like that since. And likewise, like one of my niches is men's fashion and hair, and I've written about that for a few years now. But it's not something that I started with. It's just something I sort of fell into by a combination of noticing my interests and then noticing that, hey, there's a market for that. And I think that's kind of how it has to happen naturally. Because if you spend so much time thinking about, which niche am I going to work in, then you can't get started. And I think it almost becomes an excuse. One of my things I like to talk about when it comes to this is I have a good friend who he said he was always making excuses for himself because he needed a proper this or a proper that to get started, and he didn't want to get started until everything was just right. And I think that's what a lot of writers do, is they want everything to just be perfect when they start out. And the reality of it is you just have to start. So when you're thinking about, oh, what niche am I going to write in? I would just say, have a general idea, but don't be afraid if you start really broad and then narrow as you go on.
Okay, so we have another question from Deborah. What do you do if you do have a portfolio, and a portfolio of good things that are good for portfolios?
Yeah, it use it. I think it depends. We've had some people ask, oh, I have stuff from 20 years ago or something like that, or that's in newspaper clippings, or I can scan it or something. And I think that's fine, but they're for the most part, a portfolio. And I think this is something that I didn't really touch on during the webinar for time reasons, but we talk about in our courses and in our materials, is that the purpose of a portfolio is to show where you've gotten published. It's not really to show what your writing is like, because your pitch should actually or your outreach message, like your first contact with a client or editor, should show off your writing style and should communicate that you're a good writer. And a portfolio isn't just more about like saying, hey, this is my experience, these are the people I've worked with, and that's the focus of any other portfolio in any other industry. And so that's the important thing. So if you have a good portfolio where you've worked with people, companies and individuals that are kind of well known, or at least just kind of sizable in whatever niche you have, I think that's great. You want to use that, but at the same time, you always want to be updating and refreshing your portfolio as well, always adding to it to reflect your new kind of styles and content and things like that.
As an editor, I would add that I've never bought a portfolio. Editors buy articles. And so I feel like a lot of writers get distracted by their portfolios, but that's not really the point. Like when I see a portfolio in a pitch I get, I see that as someone saying, hey, this is my credibility.
Mm-hmm.
A portfolio is good to add credibility to show that you have experience and can do the work. But ultimately, what I need is a good article.
Mm-hmm.
And 90% of how I consider that is the topic being proposed and the way that topic is being proposed. Just writing a good pitch and focusing on that is usually enough for entry-level publications. If you're going to go for a featured publication in a major magazine, you may need to have a portfolio. But most entry levels, no, you just write a good pitch. Don't go for the major opportunities that are at the very top end when you're starting out, and then you don't need to have a portfolio. But if you have a good portfolio, maybe do go for those opportunities. I have a friend who was not a freelance writer in terms of how I knew, and suddenly they were being flown to Florida to write a feature for Discover magazine. But they have a good portfolio and good experience, and so they got that opportunity. So why not go for the opportunities that you're qualified for? And don't undervalue yourself, and aim a little bit more than you think you can do.
Always be pushing yourself.
So we had another question from Stanley, and he was asking about the difference between running your own blog and freelancing. And I think that's something I can answer because I've done both. I make most of my living actually running websites. And if you want to run a blog, it's very different than freelance writing. Freelance writing involves like thinking of article ideas, pitching clients, pitching editors, and providing value mostly through either proposals, pitches, or writing. But if you're running a blog, you have all these other skills in addition to that you need to have, such as technology skills, marketing skills, just the skill of running a complex business. It's really hard to build a successful website that has a big enough audience to actually make a living. That's something I know through experience. And it's just really hard to run a blog. If you want to just write, I really recommend not running a blog or your own website. However, if you are interested in doing that, I put together a course on the topic that's available to members. It gives you the formula I've used to build a successful website, and that can make a very comfortable living. So if you are interested in that, because we have had so many people ask that question, we do have a course available that you can take for free if you join for the free month of membership. Ian, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
One thing I'll add is that I'll just say about maybe 3 years into my writing career, I did try starting a blog while doing freelance writing. And it was one of the worst periods of my career because I was suddenly, tasked with not only doing all of my regular writing work, but then also thinking about how am I going to market this? Do I have a budget to market this? Am I going to have to hire other people to write content for me, essentially, doing what I do because I don't have the time to do it. So, that's one thing to think about. And you have to have a lot of time on your hands and kind of make that your goal, but it's doable if that's what you want to do. But it just, like Jacob said, it's so different from writing, but yeah.
We are out of time, but there's one more question. Mohammed asked, what is a pitch?
I could answer that a few different ways. I mean, maybe I'll answer it, and then I'm curious to see what you have, because I think of it in two different ways. Because like literally, what a pitch is just essentially, a message or usually an email that you send to a publication, to an editor saying, hey, I want to write this I have an idea for your publication. Are you interested? That's what it literally is. Functionally, I think it's something different, because I think it's kind of like a job application and a resume and a writing sample all in one. It's really a display of all of that, so for time reasons we just really can't get into it, but we have an entire course on this because it's such a complicated question. But that's what it literally is, and I think that's what it kind of functionally is it really serves as an insight into who you are as a writer.
Mm-hmm. I would just say a lot of editors get really fed up because they get pitches that have nothing to do with the publication. So in a sense, there's a difference between a pitch and a good pitch. And a good pitch shows that you really understand exactly what the person you're pitching needs, and you know how to fill a role that they're looking to fill. And so, don't just think about writing a pitch and sending it. Really study the publication or the client and really understand them in as much depth as you can before contacting them. And if all writers did that, the world would be a better place. So at a minimum, just as Ian said throughout the presentation, focus on providing value for the client, for the person you want to pay you. So put that first, their needs and their interests and what they do, and then you'll have a lot more success. We are out of time. If you want to join us for a free month, be sure to use the coupon code first month free, or the coupon code donate. Both of those will work. And go to writinglaunch.com. You can get your first month free. And we are having a members only meeting on September 14th at 1:30 Eastern time. You can join us in a small group live Zoom meeting. If you have questions, email support@writinglaunch.com. Ian, do you have any last words?
Just thank you for watching. Definitely reach out with any questions if you have them about the membership or about the content. And hopefully you got something good out of the webinar today. And I hope it carries you far into the writing, a freelance writing career. So
Thank you, everybody.